very spirited debate. It can be very spirited, can be very heated, but then walk off afterwards with the students in tow, the ones who are, in this case, of legal drinking age, and go have a beer together. Okay, science needs affirmative action. Now, you might be wondering why I'm talking about this. This came up in Science. It's an editorial that appeared last week, last Thursday, and it came to mind for me, as I've said many times on this channel. The university is where we train at the moment the next generation of scientists, and so what's going on with the university and what have you matters. The author here is writing about the two cases with Harvard and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, UNC, that have gone to the Supreme Court surrounding their race-conscious admissions practices, affirmative action, if you will. We'll get into that, but first off, think about joining up on locals would be what I advise you in there, because the thing about locals is that you get all the videos that appear on YouTube early if you are a member, a free member. As a free member, you can like and see most of the things that go up on locals, but as a supporter, which means just paying a teeny tiny bit, either $3 a month at a minimum or $30 a year, which gives you 2 months for free, you get access to everything, including the Philosophical Friday, the Thursday evening study review after show where we do live chats with supporters, and the whole works there. So you get to come in behind the scenes and get more interaction with myself and others to actually start talking on science and get more things from me than you get on Twitter and YouTube. Things that I don't put on YouTube end up on locals. So I suggest you consider becoming a member, at a very least, a free member. You with an account for free in locals. You can be a member of any community for free, but as a supporter, you get access to everything. So with that in mind, let us go back to the article. So I want to talk about this a little bit. And make some points here. So this comes from Science. As I said, it's an editorial. As science struggles to correct systemic racism in the laboratory and throughout academia in the United States, I'll get to that in a second. External forces press on, making it even more difficult to achieve equity on all fronts, including among scientists. Now, the question here that I immediately have to stop and point out is, remember, as I said in their Thursday night review, one of the things that can often happen in scientific disciplines is that something gets studied enough, and you end up with the same conclusion over and over and over again, to the point where it becomes just general knowledge, and you end up being able to state something without a citation. But unfortunately, this also works in a different way, where something is not studied enough, or perhaps put out there as an opinion and just repeated over and over and over again without anything to back it up. And it can then be explained here without any citations to it. And this has happened here. He has not cited anything, I don't think. And I would like to see that. The other thing I would ask is, of course, how is he defining equity? And that's the defining question that I immediately ask in these things. The latest example is the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to hear cases brought against Harvard University and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, challenging their right to use race as a factor in undergraduate admissions. Something tells me it's not actually a right to do that. It may be a practice, but it's probably not a fundamental human right or a civil right, but that's neither here nor there. It is sometimes easy for scientists to let colleagues in other disciplines engage in debate like this, but the dismantling of race-conscious admissions would deal another blow to equity in science. So in this case, he is arguing here that we should be using race as a determining factor. What is the problem with this when it comes to science? What second normative principle of science is universalism? Am I correct? Universalism means that you give consideration only to the merit of a person's work, not to their race, sex, gender, political worldview, personal affiliations, professional affiliations, anything like that. None of that matters under the normative principle of universalism. And yet it is currently used at a number of universities the race-conscious admissions is currently used at a number of universities to promote that. That's not to say we don't have disparities. I am not discounting that. I'm not disagreeing that there are plenty of disparities. Doesn't necessarily mean that this is the best way to go about remedying those disparities either. I would actually be much more in favor of improving K through 12 education so that everybody got a great education and close the equity gaps, close the disparities that way, rather than dealing with affirmative action, because right now it's K through 12 education is in pretty terrible state in the United States, as shown by the slipping of scientific education and scientific status of the United States. Anyway, the Supreme Court has protected affirmative action in the past, but the court's current majority of conservative justices could mean the end of the program. This is no time for the scientific community to stay silent. It is a crucial moment for science to mobilize against this assault on diversity. Diversity, of course, here I don't think he means diversity of thought necessarily, as much as he means the diversity based on immutable characteristics. Or if meaning diversity of thought might mean the idea that presumably because you are of a different race or sex or gender that you have a different worldview on things, which is not necessarily true. And so that's a point to make on that. For more than 50 years in the United States, colleges and universities have been using multiple criteria to select undergraduates, recognizing that a diverse student body is essential for a university to achieve its mission. I asked Peter Henry, the W.R. Berkeley professor of economics and finance at New York University, about the economic data on the matter. Quote, affirmative action corrects a market failure, he said. Quote, talent is broadly distributed across the U.S. population, but opportunity is not. The process gives deserving students a chance that they might not otherwise have, adding excellence to the higher education system. It also acknowledges that not all students have an equal opportunity to excel at objectives measures like standardized tests and grading, and it levels the playing field by giving students and universities the chance to spotlight other important attributes and factors in the admissions process. This is not necessarily... Again, I don't know. I don't think he's necessarily referring to diversity as many of us would think of diversity as in diversity of thought, as much as he's thinking diversity of other things. In this case, he's thinking about race. I can agree that opportunity is not necessarily all the same everywhere, but why is that? Well, I part of the reason I would argue is K through 12 education in this country is a mess right now, so it's hard to get into college. You get a good education to get into college. That should be where the improvement lies, I think. I know something about this struggle because I was one of the chancellors of UNC who oversaw the admissions policies in question. When the Supreme Court took up the case of Abigail Fisher versus the University of Texas at Austin, I submitted an amicus brief prepared by UNC's law dean and general counsel. Fisher, a white student, challenged the university's consideration of race in its undergraduate admissions process. Denied admission in 2008, she argued that the use of race in this manner violated her constitutional right to equal protection. In the brief, it was shown convincingly that the students chosen for admission based on a range of criteria, including race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic background, fared better than those chosen solely on the basis of standardized test scores and high school grades. I want to see a citation for this. To be honest, I want to see a citation for the data that's involved, not just the amicus brief and the independent study that's involved, not just the amicus brief. The commitment to provide access to higher education has now landed UNC in the courts. Okay, this is a good point here to actually talk about the preceding case. So I think the most important case that predates this one that is probably going to figure into this is the case of Grutter versus Bollinger, 2003. This is from Ballotopedia. And I apologize, the actual Ballotopedia logo seems to have gotten cut off, but that's okay. This comes from Ballotopedia, and it's the Grutter versus Bollinger case. June 23rd, 2003 was decided by the Supreme Court. It upheld the affirmative actions admission policy of the University of Michigan Law School. The decision permitted the use of a racial preference in student admissions to promote student diversity. In 1996, Barbara Grutter, a white Michigan resident with a 3.8 grade point average and 161 law school admissions test score, was rejected by the University of Michigan Law School. She filed suit against the university in December 1997, alleging that the university had discriminated against her on the basis of race in violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Title 6 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 plainly states that you shall not discriminate on the basis of race. It's very, very narrowly, very plain language, really, to be honest. It states that pretty plainly. She said she was rejected because the law school used race as the predominant factor, giving applicants belonging to underrepresented minority groups a significantly greater chance of admission than white and Asian American applicants with similar credentials. She argued that the university had no compelling interest to justify that use of race. The university argued that there was a compelling interest in promoting diversity for educational benefits. In March 2001, U.S. Judge Bernard Friedman ruled the admissions policies were unconstitutional because they clearly consider race and are practically indistinguishable from a quota system. In May 2002, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed the decision, citing the Regents of the University of California versus Bach decision that allowed the use of race to further the, quote, compelling interest of diversity. The plaintiffs appealed the decision to the Supreme Court, which agreed to hear the case in 2002. On June 23, 2003, the court held that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment does not prohibit it was a 5-4 decision, does not prohibit the narrowly tailored use of race in university admissions plans as part of a compelling interest in promoting student diversity. The majority opinion was delivered by Justice Sandra Day O'Connor and joined by Justices John Paul David Souter, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer. O'Connor wrote the following in the majority opinion. Race-conscious admissions policies must be limited in time. The court takes the law school at its word that it would like nothing better than to find a race-neutral admissions formula and will terminate its use of racial preferences as soon as practicable. The court expects that 25 years from now, the use of racial preferences will no longer be necessary to further the interest approved today. Why do I bring that up? Because I can guarantee this is probably the words of Sandra Day O'Connor in this majority opinion from 2003 are probably going to come back into prominence with this current decision, because we are right back to where this is, except the difference is this time the students suing in the Harvard and UNC cases are Asian and not white. And that's a difference here. And we will have to see what is said now with this, and whether or not the court will force the court today will force something different. Justices William Rehnquist, Antonin Scalia, Anthony Kennedy, and Clarence Thomas dissented. The dissent was delivered by Thomas, who argued that the state did not have a compelling interest in promoting diversity, nor that having a law school is within the state's jurisdiction. He wrote the following in the dissenting opinion. As the foregoing makes clear, Michigan has no compelling interest in having a law school at all, much less an elite one. Still, even assuming that a state may, under appropriate circumstances, demonstrate a cognizable interest in having an elite law school, Michigan has failed to do so here. The equal protection obligation is imposed by the Constitution upon the states severally as governmental entities, each responsible for its own laws, establishing the rights and duties of persons within its borders. It is another obligation, the burden of which cannot be cast by one state upon another, and no state can be excused from the performance by what another state may do or fail to do. The separate responsibility of each state within its own sphere is of the essence of statehood maintained under our dual system. Which is to say, one thing here, the states don't have a right to go against the Constitution, was basically what he was saying here, and he does not believe that the Equal Protection Clause is not violated. The Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment is not violated by a race-conscious admissions policy. Following the decision, petitions were circulated to change the Michigan Constitution. So after that, there was a lot of things, but this is the one that I think is key of prior Supreme Court precedent, and I only bring it up now because it comes into the play of scientists and demanding that scientists get behind affirmative action policies, which I do not agree on this. I think there perhaps are better ways than affirmative action from creative people to help figure that don't necessarily start going off race-conscious admissions and making wild assumptions about people on the basis of their race. Which seems to happen with affirmative action, which is why I can have problems with it. Back to the actual science article. All of this is bad for science. Failure to enroll a diverse undergraduate population has already excluded outstanding people from science, and limiting affirmative action will only make matters worse. But much more insidious are the messages these fights continue to send. It's bad enough that science faculty haven't continually updated their methods of teaching to ones known to be more inclusive. Why should there be any one method of teaching to begin with? Or just as a thought, why should there be any one method of teaching to begin with? I've had a lot of professors. As I said, I am 5 years out from getting my PhD myself. And so I have seen a lot of teachers, and they don't all have the same teaching style. And what works as a teaching style for one teacher, yeah, it may not be great for all students. But it doesn't make sense that you're going to be capable of being the best teacher for all students, because it doesn't necessarily work for all students. But the teaching method is also unique to the teacher because we have an incredible diversity of teachers of all races, backgrounds, and worldviews. Interesting. Likewise, for universities and their processes for faculty hiring, promotion, and tenure that sustain inequity. Now, on top of all that, the highest court in the United States is going to engage in a highly public debate over whether many of the country's potential future students of science can enter the scientific community, continuing the perpetual message of exclusion. That's an assumption. That's actually an assumption that the Supreme Court wants to exclude in this, and that engaging in the debate at all is continuing a perpetual message of exclusion. That's not true. That's not a true thing. That's absolutely not true at all. Remarkable that he would say that right there. Now that I've said it, now that I've noticed it, it's just like, what? What? So engaging in the debate, in the highly public debate, is pushing a message of exclusion that students of science can't enter the scientific community. No, actually it doesn't do that. It asks a legitimate question of whether or not it's right to use race-conscious admissions for that, which under the normative principles of universalism, if I'm going off of that with respect to science, no. It's not right to consider. And I think there are better ways to remedy the disparities, as I've already said, and offered some suggestions there, than to actually do this kind of thing going on here. I don't think this is a good idea to engage in affirmative action to mention long term. And in addition, one of the things I should point out is the Grutter versus Bollinger decision. One of the things that the Supreme Court ruled in 2003, and the reason it worked out was because in the majority opinion, they said so long as it was narrowly tailored and considered as one of many criteria and not the dominant criteria. The critique of the narrowly tailored argumentation that the Supreme Court went with is that how do you define narrowly tailored? Because you're using something that is that can be really amorphous in ways. How are you making it narrowly tailored? I forget where is it. I think it might be in this article actually. In its appeal to the Supreme Court, the group asked. The group brought similar claims against UNC. A federal judge cited in its appeal to the Supreme Court, the group asked the panel to review both cases and also to overturn the court's 2003 decision in Grutter versus Bollinger, which upheld admissions policies at the University of Michigan's law school. The decision cleared colleges to consider race if it's done in a narrowly tailored way to serve a compelling interest. The group's appeal argued that the Grutter decision endorsed racial objectives that are amorphous and unmeasurable and thus incapable of narrow tailoring. And that's what I mean when I'm saying this is like, how do you define narrow tailoring? How do you define it? And that is the problem. But that is why it's been upheld in the past. So the guy here in science is not wrong that the Supreme Court has upheld it in the past, but the Supreme Court upheld it with the idea that it should be narrowly tailored in service to a compelling interest. And that's why some of the challenges, like the one he talks about with U Texas Austin, have held up. The question, of course, is whether or not that's right. And that's both a moral and a legal judgment to be had. The cases currently before the court involve claims that Asian American students are penalized for their race in admissions decisions at Harvard and UNC. As Jennifer Lee, professor of sociology at Columbia University, points out in the editor's blog this week, that misrepresents Asian American sentiment. 70% of Asian Americans support affirmative action, and 10% and fewer than 10% have reported being passed over for college admissions. As Lee notes, the case before the court will not address real anti-Asian bias on college campuses. That whole paragraph seems very much like a non sequitur to me. It literally does not necessarily. I mean, I understand that may be the polling data. That's not the issue. The issue is whether or not it's right to discriminate, whether or not it's right to do race-conscious admissions. And it doesn't necessarily, a consensus on something doesn't necessarily make it right. And yeah, sure, that's great. If fewer than 10% have been passed over for college admissions, that's great. But that doesn't necessarily play into whether or not it's right. These students do have a legitimate case. It is about the specific case before the court and whether or not it does set the precedent to turn that over. So I think this whole paragraph right here is a non sequitur for the argument. What can scientists do to counteract all of this? Study the data showing that talent is broadly distributed and then use this evidence to help fight exclusive practices. It's also important to emphasize that grades and standardized testing scores alone are insufficient selection criteria. But more importantly, show up this go-round. Students deserve to see science faculty rise up alongside colleagues in humanities to support affirmative action. That will be a powerful message of welcome. Okay. How there could have been some help here is actually citing that and giving me some data to look at, because I would love to look at it. To be honest, I would be very curious to see some of the data that he is saying exists but didn't cite. It's also important to emphasize, actually, this is one thing I will give him this. I do actually agree with that sentiment. Grades and standardized test scores alone are an insufficient criteria partly because I don't think K through 12 education is necessarily all that great in the United States, as I said, and that's why I say if we improve it, I think we'll actually see a lot of the equity, a lot of the disparities rather close, better than using a race-conscious practice of something. It'll be better than using a race-conscious practice would be my thought. The other thing he's saying here is he's asking, but in that sense, though, I do agree for a different reason with that standardized test scores and grades alone are not sufficient, if only because, I said it the other day when I was talking about the number of PhDs, it's being a scientist isn't for everybody. And sometimes you discover that. Sometimes you discover that going through the process and you realize, maybe this isn't the right career for me. And that's just a normal thing that everybody tends to go through. Let's see. Not to say it can't. Anybody can be a scientist. That's not what I'm not saying I'm not saying anything negative about who can be a scientist. Anybody can be a scientist, but it is not a career for everybody to be a scientist. That's just nature what it is. Not everybody ends up liking being a scientist. You can be good at it and dislike it. You can be terrible at it and love it in the same breath. But more importantly, show up. Okay. I would love to see. This is a call to be an activist in this. And yes, you can do that here because you're talking about an issue. You're not talking about a research topic. And disinterestedness does tend to have to do with research itself as a normative principle. So this is that particular important thing. And here's the thing I would say to that is he going to be just as thrilled about it if a bunch of scientists say to the opposite, that we don't think this is a good idea to have affirmative action, and we actually back the students who brought the cases before Harvard and UNC. I don't know, but I'd be curious to know that. And what would be a powerful message of welcome would be to have that disagreement on campus and let it be known that, let it be known and let there be spirited debate and disagreement between scientists and professors on campus, one who supports and one who doesn't, and let that be a powerful message of welcome when you see those professors get into those debates and have very spirited debate, can be very spirited, can be very heated, but then walk off afterwards with the students in tow, the ones who are, in this case, of legal drinking age, and go have a beer together, or go have a drink together, or go have dinner together. Something like that immediately afterwards. That is a real powerful message of welcome, that just because we disagree on something as contentious as this can be, we can still go and have a good time. We can still go and be human beings. Because right now, that's something we really need to see. That's something that would be a real, true message of welcome to everybody, particularly with respect to diversity of thought. So that's my thoughts on this particular one. A little bit different for me because I don't usually cover legal cases, but this does pertain directly to science. Why? Because universities are the training ground for the next generation of scientists, as I've said. That's it for now. If you like this video, hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, all that good jazz. And don't forget to pop over to join us on Locals, as I said, because you get all this kind of stuff early on Locals, along with all the special supporter exclusive things if you're a supporter. But at least behind the scenes, as a member, you also get extra things that I dig up all the time. Until next time, I'm Adrian, and I hope you stay curious, my friends.